Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. This is one of our training series for racial justice. And after this training, you're going to get access to your reflection journals and your application videos coming up just Monday after this. So thank you all. This is our second installment. And I'm excited today because we'll be talking about what it means for white folks to engage in racial justice work. And we'll be specifically looking at just a few of those moments where covert racism may not be particularly noticed by white folks as well. I do want to check you all in and ask you all to wave at me if you're doing good this morning. If you're all right, if you're doing good, wave at me. Perfect. Nice. The cool thing about these trainings is that they will be really interactive. The first thing I want to remind you of is please don't take screenshots of your screens. These slides are proprietary, but the videos are going up on YouTube. So please follow that and you'll get a chance to watch this over as many times as you'd like. The next thing I want to do is just talk about what the purpose of today's training is. Many well-meaning white people hold stereotypes, unfounded fears, biases, and racist beliefs about Black people. These internal contradictions are the result of living in a racialized society, and they manifest as covert racism. During this training, participants will learn how covert racism manifests amongst white people who consider themselves allies to communities of color. And so today we're going to really understand the difference between being a non-racist and being an ally, demonstrate why and how white people fail to show up for people of color despite their intentions, identify multiple forms of covert racism in the 21st century, and then explore ways to repair harm after racist interactions have occurred. All right, so that is the second installment. Here's the journey that we're on this morning, and I want to encourage y'all to be interactive. So last time you all gave us some feedback to say, hey, Jeremy, break down a little bit more of what's going on here. For each training, we're going to have activities. Those are going to require full participation, not just from those who love to talk, but from even the folks who are a little bit more quiet. I want to engage you all as well. We're also going to have large discussions. We want to make sure you speak into your phone. You can also raise your hand. We can call on you, but then we'll also have a private chat box where you can ask your questions to the moderator as well. We're also going to have reflection journals after this. And so listen, you're going to see some things on the slide and you're going to see that icon, that book icon. Whenever you see that icon on the slide, you know that that particular content goes deeper in your reflection journal. That's important because we can't cover everything deeply in this training, but you will get a chance to go deeper in your reflection journals. We also have application videos coming up as well. And then in your Zoom groups, I want to remind you all that those are cameras on. You also want to figure out who's going to be the note taker. I'm actually going to put a link in the chat box for you all when you all need to take notes, because those are going to be guided discussions where full inclusion is strongly encouraged. All right, so that is the lay of the land for our racial justice trainings, okay? And I'd like to start off with an icebreaker as well. Oh, no, let's go to community culture. You know, in doing these trainings over the years, one of the things I've realized is that folks show up and they operate with the mindset that they have. And it can be difficult to find safety, not comfort, safety when we're having conversations about race. And so what I want to offer you all is a few things that can help you create a community culture. And so you'll see the icons here. You have the eyes and you have the hands. The idea here is that when you see these things, here's how you can help out, okay? And so the first thing is, I like to call it toxic positivity. Some of y'all may be guilty of this, okay? Someone's telling you a bad story or something that would make you feel sad, and you're looking at them and you're going, you know what? It's not that bad. Or, you know what? There's always a silver lining, or, hey, there's still hope. This can be really problematic in conversations about race, especially if it's coming from a Caucasian person or a white person, because it can feel like you're dismissing the gravity of the experiences for folks of color. And so if we see ourselves or feel ourselves or see someone else doing that type of stuff, the question I'd like to ask is, for who? For who is it not that bad? For who do we see silver linings? For who has hope? Honoring the uncomfortable tense and emotional emotions and emotional moments is critical, okay? And so when you find yourself being toxically positive, as in diverting conversations from being too deep and putting in something positive instead, ask yourself, who is that beneficial to hear? And can I really honor this moment? The next thing, I like to call them cringy comments, okay? This could make you or someone else seem biased, racist, or ignorant. There are some things that I want us to share. Listen to me, in racial justice work, it starts with you being able to say what you're thinking. And a lot of times, white folks, particularly in conversations about race, you aren't used to having them. Your parents didn't grow up potentially talking to you about what it means to be white or what it means for other folks not to be white. And so this conversation can be a little awkward because you may say some stuff. I want you to please lean into those ideas and use them to learn something new. So in order to do that well, y'all, you got to lay that comment out there, not trying to defend yourself, but be looking to ask a question, share a thought, make the comment without rationalizing, and allow folks to educate you. This is not an opportunity for you to say what you believe. It's an opportunity for you to look into yourself and identify something new you can learn, okay? And it begins with sometimes having to say those cringy things. All right, what I don't want to see is identity mining. Okay, folks of color may be in spaces and they may not be speaking up, and it could be for a reason. Sometimes they may be mentally checked out because they may be feeling burdensome by what's going on in the world. There's a lot of reasons. What I don't want white folks to do in the space, though, or people with power and privilege, that can be of any color or race. I don't want folks with power and privilege or white folks to mine the identities of folks who may be marginalized. You know, sometimes it looks like, hey, well, what do you think, Jeremy? You're a Black guy. Those moments can be really detrimental because I might be keeping my composure, right? Recognizing that folks show up to this space from their vantage point and our realities can really impact what shapes our conversations. So if you're a person of power and privilege, I prefer for you to think out loud, okay? Remember to share space, but instead of asking folks to say something, why don't you say something and then take perspective back if they want to give it? We also want to take a look at power dynamics. People with certain roles and titles can shift an environment. Sometimes the wrong person showing up, who is a boss or a manager, can make folks in that group become a lot more silent. That's why we have the infinity groups. But what I want to do is, and I say this jokingly, I want to exercise a little bit of cancel culture. And what I mean is we don't want to cancel people, but we do want to cancel the culture of people dominating ideas, creating false expectations, and creating dynamics and situations that don't serve everybody here, okay? And so those are our community culture things that I want to bring for you. Any questions about any of these things in our community culture? Do they make sense to y'all? And remember, if you see these things, please do your best with good intentions to really help each other engage in this conversation authentically, but also not dominate it as well. All right, here's our icebreaker, y'all. This is called From Where I Stand. Here's how you play it. I have blocks on the screen, and I want you all to use your phone because I want you to tell me which numbers to uncover. Your goal, though, is to go from one side of the screen, the left side, starting at 1, and move over to the right side, ending with 13. Except you have to do it on the right path. So there is a hidden path under these blocks that you want to actually do in order, okay? It may not go from 1 to 2, it may go from 1 to 5 or 1 to 4. You all have to call out one number and I'll uncover it, starting with 1, and then you call out a new number like 2, I'll uncover it. If you get to 2 and it's red, you lose your steps and someone else has to call out the numbers. If you get to 2 and it's green, you can call out a new number, okay? Real simple. One person, call out a number starting with 1 and then the next one. If it's red, you lose, somebody else goes. If it's green, you can continue. Your goal as a group is to get from one side of the grid all the way to the other with as least amount of people as possible, okay? Let's play the game from where I stand. First person, call out one, please.
One.
All right, one. Someone else call out two or five or four, whichever one.
Five.
I hear five. Is that the right one? Yes. New number.
9.
I heard 9. I'm gonna go with that. Ooh.
7.
Nope, going all the way back. All right, someone else. 1.
1.
All right, new number.
4.
Somebody said 4.
Yes.
Wrong.
10.
Nope, starting with 1. New number.
3.
3. You can't skip. You can only go forward, sideways, or upward.
6.
Somebody said 5. Yes, good job. All right, keep going.
6.
7.
Okay, I heard 6 really loud. Wrong way. Gonna go back. All right, starting with 1 again. Someone else.
5.
Okay, y'all kind of caught on here. 5 is next. What's next?
8.
7.
Oh, someone said, oh, I heard 7. Wrong. Ha ha. Come on back. All right, so we got 1. What's the next number?
5.
5.
We got 5. What's the next
8.
2.
8. All right, somebody has an attitude. You're halfway there.
11.
11.
I hear 11. Wrong. Shake my
30.
hand all the way back. Okay, 1. Next number.
5.
Next number.
8.
Next.
12. 12.
Okay, I heard 12 loud and clear. Good job.
Oh.
Long enough. All right. What's the
13.
next number? Who?
14.
I heard 14. Wow, you're right where you need to be. And another number.
13.
13. Done. Congratulations, y'all.
Yay.
All right, so let's debrief here. I want to go to the next slide, and I want to ask you all, what did you observe? Okay, the specific question is, what did you observe? What were you thinking about, and how is it applicable? Anybody, what did you notice while playing the game?
That we were all doing it together, working together to complete the goal.
Thank you.
That you had to learn from like the past mistakes of the group and where to go.
Uh-oh, okay, Lindsay, I see you. Somebody else, one more person. What did you notice?
If you messed up, you had to start over all together again.
If you messed up, you got to go right back to the beginning. Is there somebody else that wants to answer this question? What did you notice?
Each round you had to kind of be more and more attentive to like kind of see where you're going.
That's good. So with each one, you started going, oh, wait a minute. Let me remember what happened last time so I can be better next time. What came to mind while playing the game? Did anything come to your mind?
I tried to think if there was like a relationship between the numbers, like, okay, we're gonna add by 5, now we're gonna add by 4. Like, how is it working? You know, what's the pattern?
Yeah, you were looking for relationships and patterns. Interesting. All right, somebody else. What came to mind while playing?
Had to go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
One.
Okay, and then did you like that? How did you feel about it?
That one was okay. I didn't like the second one because I figured we should have gotten that one faster.
Okay, so you were kind of judging the group a little bit. Is there anybody else? What came to mind while playing?
I was trying to figure out what it was a metaphor for, right? Like assuming this process was a metaphor for racial justice learning.
Oh, well, look at you, Mr. Fancy Pants. So how does this game relate to everyday life?
History to present.
Can you speak a little bit more about that, Sarah?
Learning from what has happened in history or in the past to help show us where we're going in the future.
Yeah.
Trying to see mistakes that have already been made so we don't make them again in the future.
That's powerful, Sarah. You're actually really good. That's why this particular training came after last month's training, which was around the historical context of racial justice. That's good. Any other real world applications for this game?
Everyone has different approaches to how to solve a problem, but everyone's input was valuable because we either learned that it wasn't the way to go or that it was the right way to go.
I like it, Rachel. Someone else?
I thought about you don't know who is helping you, but you need people in your life to sometime to complete a goal. And we don't see, it doesn't matter what the color, the race, to get to that goal. You work together.
Nice. Is there someone else that has another real world application for me?
Sometimes you don't know that you've said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing until you've done it.
Look at you, Anne. So that's good. That reminds me of this question. How does this game relate to being an ally to communities of color?
Jeremy, this is Mary. I had one more to add, scared to play.
Oh, can you elaborate just a little bit more, Mary?
Just catch, like people had said, trying to catch on to the pattern and everything, and unsure of myself of where to, and then if I would say the wrong one, everybody'd have to go back. So didn't lend my voice to that.
Yeah, Mary, I think you actually helped us answer this question as well. One of the ways in which allyship and doing it with communities of colors is similar is that a lot of times folks who want to be allies, who want to show up correctly, the fear of doing something wrong is like, I ain't gonna say nothing, right? I'm not gonna do anything. I'm not going to a march. I don't know if that's good. And so sometimes, to your point, Mary, allies can even feel like they don't know what to do as well. Any other ways this relates to being an ally?
Well, along those lines, at first we were kind of hesitant and guessing, but then as we started to figure out the pattern, we were more confident. You know, we knew the first and the second one and the third one, but then we were in uncharted territory again and having to kind of guess our way through. So you kind of learn as you go.
That's good. You learn as you go. But what I like that you were hinting at there is you kept saying we, right? Being an ally to communities of color requires that folks understand it's not about you. It's about a collective, and we can move further together. Is there any other ways this relates to being an ally to communities of color?
In our American culture, we try to rush to the solution before we take the proper steps in the proper order, or at least think about waiting for each other to go together, but don't jump from one all the way to the end and skip the steps in the middle.
That's good stuff. And I'll take a few more, then we'll move on.
It takes both sides, the whites as well as, what do you call it, BIPOCs?
Yeah, Black
we can't do it alone.
Yep, people of color, yeah.
We have to be an ally if we're a person of color to ourselves.
That's good. All right, so let's keep it moving, y'all. The next thing I want to have a conversation about is what is the definition of an ally? All right, I'd like 3 readers, preferably folks who haven't spoken yet during the trainings. I have a 3-part definition, and you'll notice the icon, that is your reflection journal icon. It means that you're gonna read this definition, but you got some work to do around this definition in your reflection journal. You're definitely gonna go deeper next week. I need 3 readers, preferably folks who haven't spoken yet. Here's the first part of the definition. Who'd like to read?
I'll read. Someone who makes the commitment and effort to recognize their privilege based on gender, class, race, sexual identity, etc., and work in solidarity with oppressed groups in the struggle for justice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. What stands out to you all about the first part of the definition for being an ally?
Making a commitment.
Yep. Someone else?
I feel like people, sorry.
Go ahead.
I feel like it's for people recognizing their own privilege, like admitting that they have privilege.
Yes. So for an example, I was talking to my wife the other night, and we were watching the show, and it had a drag queen on it. And the host, they were talking, and someone else had threw shade at the drag queen, right? And so the host said, "Wow, someone just threw shade at the drag queen." And I said, "You know, we use a lot of LGBTQ language in our everyday life, and they never get the credit for it." And my wife said, yeah, that's true. And then I asked her, I said, who do you think's to blame for that? Just jokingly. And she looked at me and said, you. And for a moment, I had forgotten that I had privilege as a heterosexual, heteronormative person in America. And that even though I'm Black, I can still have both a targeted identity being African-American and privileged identities being Christian and being heteronormative and heterosexual. And so it's critical that even though we're talking about race during this training, we recognize the intersectionality of our identities as well. All right, I need a second reader.
I'll read. Allies understand that it is in their own best interest to end all forms of oppression, even those from which they may benefit in concrete ways.
Does anything stand out to anybody about that second part?
Even if they benefit?
Yeah, and why does that stand out to you?
Because individually it may, like maybe in the immediate moment, they may benefit, but in the long run and for everybody else, it's like an empathy thing. It's in everybody's best interest.
Yes. You know, I gave an analogy last training that talked about how if we're all living on the same block and a house is burning down that way, if we don't put out that fire, our house will eventually catch fire as well. And so even though it may not seem like it's impacting you, if somebody's oppressed, everybody's oppressed. And so that collective responsibility toward racial justice is critical. Thank you for that. All right, and I'll have my last reader.
I can read.
Mm-hmm.
Allies commit to reducing their own complicity or collusion in oppression of those groups. Uh-oh, my screen's too small. I can't see the last line.
And invest in strengthening their own knowledge and awareness of oppression.
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you. Is there anything that stands out to anyone else about that last part?
I like the word invest because it like really is almost like an investment. Like you can invest your time, you can invest your money in like buying books or other resources and stuff. It's just like really an investment that's like later gonna, again, go back to the second one, benefit everybody.
Yeah, and you really have made a really cool, almost loaded comment there, right? That word investment is really rooted in economics. And what we recognize historically is that African-American and people of colors, racism and capitalism go together, right? Many times we were victims of genocide and oppression for the economic advancement of white folks with power and privilege, right? And so that investment is critical there. And also, in order for us to really put our, for lack of a better term, our money where our mouth is, we have to make sure that we're also investing as well in folks of color and marginalized identities as well. One of the things America does really well is it divests from folks who are marginalized. And in doing that, creating conditions of poverty and lack of resource also makes folks more susceptible to other mental health conditions and life struggles that can keep them from being advanced as a people group. So thank you for bringing that part out. No one has ever actually looked at that word invest quite like that before. All right, is there anyone else burning to analyze this definition?
I was just going to say, I like the word choice of reducing complicity or collusion, because that implies that you're not going to eliminate it. It's only about lessening it. As long as that oppression exists, you're complicit and colluding in it to some extent. So it's just a matter of lessening the amount.
Javier, you speak truth there. I appreciate it. So check this out, y'all. Let's continue the conversation. By show of hands, who in this room would say that they are not racist? This isn't a trick question, just asking. Who in the room would say, I'm not racist, by a show of hands? Okay. You all are very afraid to raise your hands. Don't be afraid, it's fine. I'm not judging you at all. Who in this room would say, you know what, I'm not racist? Okay, right. It's important for us to recognize that we say these things in order for us to unpack them. Right? One of the things we talk about when it comes to anti-racism work is that, I guess I can take it from a bit of a historical perspective here. Before the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, it was like normal for white folks to explicitly say, I'm racist, I don't like folks of color. Well, what happens is, in part, when folks in the North, who were largely considered to be quote unquote not racist, began to see how Black folks who were doing marches and sit-ins were treated, then the whole country had to reconcile with the moral obligation of saying, you know what, maybe it's not so good that we segregate people, and maybe it's not so good that we imprison them based off of their color. And so around that time, we'll see what we call the evolution of racism, where white folks couldn't just blatantly say, I'm a racist. And so there became a lot of stereotypes and ideas about who was racist and who wasn't racist, and it became a linear, or it became a really either or, okay? And so this idea of not being racist, and that if you are, you're quote unquote a good person, came from the idea that white folks were uncomfortable as to how Black folks and other people of color were treated, but it oftentimes stopped short, right? And so the idea here is this: if you say, I'm not racist, the question becomes, if you're not racist, what work do you have to do internally to dismantle your internalized racism? If I say I'm not, then the idea behind that, a small seed of I might be alleviated from the responsibility to do my own work, right? And so what I want to encourage us to do is avoid saying you're not racist. And I know that can sound like an oxymoron. I know it can. But I want you to avoid saying it. Why? Because especially if you're a white person, you have to understand that you were socialized into racism. And so therefore you have racist ideas and beliefs and potentially interactions that you have to unpack in order for you to do that work. Many white folks will say, as long as I can stop other white people from doing racist things, I'm good. No, you have to start with yourself, okay? And so this idea that not being racist, it comes with some titles, y'all. Who in America would we say ourselves, they're probably not racist based off of what they believe or their titles or their affiliations? Anybody got an idea? Who in America do we assume is usually not racist? We're digging deep today, y'all. Come on.
Liberals.
Liberals. Thank you, Katie. Someone else.
I was going to say, Jeremy, people who profess to be Christians.
Woo! I got a whole training on religion and racism. Yes. Somebody else.
I saw this video. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say BIPOC individuals.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. When we talk about racism, the system, we recognize that people of color, because we don't benefit from it, we wouldn't be considered as racist. Right. Well, we would be considered as prejudice, okay? Or we may discriminate against folks, but we don't benefit from the system. Therefore, we can't enact the system at our own will. All right, but thank you for saying that.
That's good to know. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah. Somebody else.
Jeremy, can I contribute something?
Please.
I don't know, the teachings of James Baldwin, right? The idea is that we're all racist. Like if you say you're not a racist, you don't even, it's not how white you are. It's not how racist, what is the quote? It's how racist you aren't. We're all racist, every single one of us, because we do an in-group, out-group processor, right? Because if I'm white and he's Black, we're different, right? Or we don't see, because of our barrier there, we don't see the similarity, right? So we're all racist. It's to what degree of racism we possess. And it's just inherently a human problem, is that the observer can't observe the observer, right? Like it's a philosophical question. So we think, oh, I'm not racist, but you can't see you're outside of your own paradigm. So you can't answer that question anyway. But so are we, and so many of us are dichotomous because we wouldn't display on the outside what we think on the inside, right?
Go ahead. That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. So one of the things I do want to share is that many times we put labels on folks, and what we can do is, what's dangerous about the label is that when you begin to label yourself something, thinking, if I just subscribe to that idea or this group of people, then I am going to avoid being at least like you said, assumed racist. Okay, we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's called optical allyship. The idea here is that you're only doing stuff to make sure nobody else can point to you and say you're racist. And that's problematic, because then what you're doing is you're performing. You're assuming and you're performing, and underneath that, we never get to the actual biases and the actual harm that you could be causing. So these are all the labels that folks come up with to be like, nope, I'm not racist. But the truth of the matter is, you can be well-meaning, progressive, open-minded, moderate, and even from the North, and even Democratic, and still perpetuate racism. And so this idea that being a racist is bad, this binary conversation that we're having about racism has to stop, right? It has to, because if folks think that, you know, being racist is terrible, it becomes a moral thing that we're not willing to deal with. And so instead of saying being racist is bad, like you said, Kate, we have to recognize some of us have a lot more unpacking to do than others, but all of us have to do some unpacking. And so what we don't want to do, and I've seen this a lot on Facebook, y'all, is we'll be like, look at those Trump supporters. They're all ignorant. There's some folks who didn't vote for Trump who are also ignorant. And ignorant is applied to certain contexts and facets. Bigoted, old, closed-minded, all of those things, we have to stop labeling racism and start really approaching anti-racism from a perspective that says, you know what, I'm on my journey, right? I come with the fundamental understanding that I live in a racialized society, whether it be internalized racism or external or whatever, and I got to get to doing my own work. And so I love this quote, okay, about, and I believe it's pronounced Ajiamo Alua. It says, the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism, to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And that's the only way forward, okay? And so we couldn't go any further in this training if we don't begin to do that work there and really unpacking that. Okay, so here's what I want to do. I'm going to put you all, we're going to get into our affinity groups. You all see Martin Luther King here. What we have a part of this training are a few excerpts from his letter from jail. And what we're going to do is, that letter is so amazing. You're going to find these same excerpts in your reflection journals as well. But for today, what I want to do is, I want to introduce you all to a piece of something that he said, an excerpt, and then I'm gonna have three questions for y'all to answer, okay? This is what you're gonna do in your infinity groups. So you're simply gonna read that excerpt, and then after you read it, you're gonna be able to have two discussions and then to share out. So in this particular excerpt, I want you all to discuss, how does Dr. King compare the moderate white folks with his white brothers from the South? You also wanna discuss, what might Dr. King be referring to when he mentions strong, persistent, and determined actions? And then lastly, share examples of how white people can correctly engage in racial justice work. So if you are taking notes, you can as well. I'm going to read the excerpt, put you all in the groups, and then I'll try to put a link for a handout for you all as well. So it says, I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined actions. I'm thankful, however, that some of our white brothers in the South, look at that, have grasped the meaning of the social justice revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too few in quantity, but they are big in quality. Unlike so many of their moderate brothers and sisters, they have recognized the urgency of the moment and seized the need for powerful action, antidotes to combat the disease of segregation, okay? So now, what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna get a link for you all to use during your discussion and put that link right on in the chat box. Just a moment. I'm gonna go to the chat box. So that way you all can have the actual excerpt and you all can look at the questions as well. And right now, the only thing we're doing is we're answering this first excerpt, not all of it, okay? So don't be tempted to read ahead. We'll get there later. Everybody clear about what's happening? Any questions or for clarification? All right, remember, you discuss the questions, and then when we come back, have one person be prepared to share out the actual discussion question I put up there, okay? All right, you all can get into your groups now.
Okay, so that, folks, it'll take about 30 seconds, a minute to get you all into your groups, and we'll be ready to go.
And just an FYI, I think we've learned in the past that you need to open up the document now, because when you go to your group, you might not have the group chat. You'll have your affinity group chat.
Perfect. And you can type right on in the document. It's fillable. Yeah.
Jeremy, could I ask a quick question about the anti-racism idea?
Yeah.
That quote that you shared reminded me a lot of the idea from the How to Be an Anti-Racist book by, I might mispronounce his name, Abram Kennedy. Is it Kennedy or Kennedy? I was wondering, do you know whether that was his original idea and the quote might be informed from that, or is it an older idea that's been around?
I'm not sure who came of it first. I do know anti-racism, the conversation around it actually, I want to say, showed up in the late 90s. And so there have been folks who have been really unpacking what that meant for a while now. And then obviously as certain books and documentations kind of float to the surface, things start to sound very similar. But I can definitely make sure I double check, but I believe there's definitely more than one person having the conversation.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that though.
Sure. No, I really liked the idea around anti-racism is a constant choice.
All right, welcome back everybody. Hopefully you all found your conversation to be productive. What I'd like to do is, quick question, just anybody, how did you like your conversations in your group? Did you feel like they were productive at all? A head nod, a hand raise, yep. Okay, perfect. All right, let's get to that third question though. Anyone want to share their group's examples? Who'd like to go first?
I can talk for my group. One of the things I thought was really productive in our group, we talked about relating this quote to sort of present day, like during the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement and how much we were seeing so much of voices being heard, but the persistence is the most important part of that. Like it could be like a popular thing to do to make your Facebook profile, a blackout thing. And then, but what are you doing in your own life consistently or persistently to embody those, the Black Lives Matter, ideas?
That's powerful, Haley. So you all talked a little bit about what it means to be like, oh, let's do what I call symbolic allyship, right? Symbolism, as opposed to being like, no, you blacking out your Facebook profile doesn't do anything to move the actual work forward. Thank you. Can I have another group?
You go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, in our group, we just talked about, well, one thing you said in the beginning was them or white people talking with their families first. I think that's one of the most challenging things because you love your family members, but holding them accountable and having these important conversations are definitely like dismantle it in your own home first.
Yeah.
And then we also said not leading, but uplifting. A lot of times, white people want to lead, and there are already people and within your community that have been doing this for years. Find out organizations and different people that are doing the work in the community and donate whatever that might be, money, time.
Yes.
Sharing things on social media.
That's good. That's 2 out of 4. Can I get a third group, please?
I can hop on. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So for our group, we kind of said the same thing as far as just having those difficult conversations. Another person in our group also mentioned how white people themselves should educate themselves. because that helps, at least in our opinion, we believe that that would better help them be able to have those difficult conversations because they know what they're at least looking towards. And then also it just makes the conversation have a little bit more depth and just be more thorough as finding the root of the problem.
That's good. That's good. And then last group, thank you, Kayla. Is
This
it
is Susan.
Kyla or Kayla?
It's Kyla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Susie from our group. A few of the things we talked about was just really the importance of like feeling urgency, staying consistent, right, to the like earlier point about like quality, like be in it. Like if you're gonna be there to try to be an ally, to what the other group said, like stay consistent and feel urgency. And then something that someone else in our group said that's a little bit like, I guess, what not to do, but I feel like sometimes it's important to be like, don't do this, is, sometimes you hear people say things like, probably especially white people, like, oh, but it's not like the 60s. That can sound really dismissive of like what it is right now and how the conversations and urgency about racial justice are like very important now. And there's still a lot of systemic racism. And so I think it's just like, sometimes that's a way for people to, toxic positivity, right? But it's not that bad, right? And I think it's super important to don't do that.
Right. Thank you, Susie. I appreciate it. You all were talking about how you can definitely stop comparing this decade to the last one, specifically assuming that just because we don't have something called Jim Crow laws, that means folks aren't using laws in a way to oppress people systematically. That assumption, we kind of did a Mythbuster last training as well. That's critical. Thank you so much for that. All right, well, that's good, y'all. So you're gonna see MLK's letter excerpts come up throughout the training at appropriate places for you all to get into your groups and kind of unpack a little bit what we're talking about here as well as we go along. We're gonna keep on moving. So in order for us to have an even deeper conversation, let's unpack a little bit this overt racism, okay? Overt racism. Can I have a reader, please? Someone who can see the screen clearly could read this for us.
I can read. Overt racism. Overt racism is the intentional and/or obvious harmful attitudes, ideas, or behaviors towards another minority, individual, or group because of the color of his or her skin. Elias, 2015.
Oh, that's just a reference, sorry, yeah.
Oh, okay. It is rooted in white supremacy ideology and is practiced by individuals, groups, institutions, and across societies. Overt racist actions are those that are the easiest to see and describe as racism, unlike the more insidious or covert forms of racism.
All right, and can I have someone read about covert racism?
I can do that. All right, covert racism is racial discrimination that is concealed or subtle rather than obvious or public, acts to subvert, distort, restrict, and deny racial groups access to societal privileges and benefits. Key feature of covert racism is its disguised nature, allows perpetrators to claim plausible deniability and to essentially gaslight their victims. That is to deny that the act was racist and undermine any claim of harm.
All right, so we got them side to side, y'all. What stands out to you the most about covert versus overt racism?
I think covert racism, because it kind of like hides itself in the, like you were talking about a couple slides before, when people started to think, oh, maybe racism is not a great idea. Covert racism kind of took over and kind of it just sits underneath the surface level of I'm not racist.
Thank you.
And yeah.
I find out that some things that were overt then become covert. Just like some of the shootings and so forth, then they try to dig a hole and bury it. Goes back and forth between these two, but it still remains that it's all racism.
Yeah, sometimes we'll say, you know what, we don't quote unquote have those laws, but we still act like it, right? A good example of that is racial cleansing in neighborhoods, right? And so back in the day, they could actually have signs that said this is an all white neighborhood. Well, after the Civil Rights Act passed, that became a little less socially acceptable, right? And so then they turned that overt into covert, and then they started using policies with landlords and people who give out loans to say, listen, we're going to redline these communities. We can't say that they're actually for white folks, but what we can do is use the Federal Housing Administration to build out public housing and suburbs, and then put highways in between communities, right? And so because it is structural, it looks covert. People just live in their neighborhoods and they're happy about their lives, and it's cool, and you don't even notice it. For some reason, Black folks love to be around each other, and so for some reason, Latinx folks just can't get enough of themselves, right? But we don't realize that institutions evolved how they facilitate racism as well. And so they found ways to create neighborhoods in what seemingly is a covert way that also further instills these ideas of what it means to be separate. Yes. That's good.
I often think,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was often thinking that, covert racism often really relies on like power dynamics between white people and BIPOC people that aren't always clear or overt. So it's just that power dynamic aspect of it, of covert racism.
Yeah, thank you. And so here are some examples of what it means of overt racism and covert racism. And so you'll see at the top, using the analogy of an iceberg, that overt racism, there's a lot less things happening on the surface that are explicit. Okay, this is important. A lot of folks feel like it's the opposite, that there's more things happening outside in the world that you can see and less happening inside of folks or that are under the rug, but no, it's the opposite, y'all. That overt racism, those hate crimes, whitewashing, that police violence, that's all stuff we can point to. And if we're not careful, we'll start saying, well, that ain't me. I didn't do that. And that's problematic. What we want to do is recognize that for as much as there is overt racism, covert racism is twice or 3 times as huge. It's the rest of that iceberg, y'all. So even when we talk about celebrating colonialized holidays, right? For Thanksgiving, I always make a really good point, even on my social media page, to say like, you know what? This is celebrating the indigenous lives of folks who own and possess this land before it was colonialized, right? Just verbalizing that and trying to normalize the conversation around equity and stop the erasure of people of color in history, right? We even got Eurocentric curriculums. That still happens today. Folks are learning much more about history from a Eurocentric perspective than they are from an actual American perspective, which should include everybody who contributed to it, right? Supporting oppressive policies. There's research that folks who are trying to be allies, for example, the LGBTQ community, a lot of folks claim that they're allies in person. They say, oh, I love homosexual people or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of them vote for policies that increase oppression, like them not having access to healthcare or being able to care for their spouses. And so many times there's this conflict of interest, or there's this internal contradiction that happens, right? We're saying, no, we don't like those things over here, but in our everyday lives, we're making decisions that contradict that truth. And those things can be very covert, right? Tokenism, getting folks who look other than white and who are maybe other than straight, right, other than Christian, to become a part of a team. And one of the things we'll talk about in our next training is that if you're going to invite folks of color or marginalized identities into your spaces, you have to do the work to make sure the space is welcoming for them. What oftentimes happens is we invite folks into spaces and then we ask them, well, what can we do to make it work for you? It'd be like inviting someone in your house and asking them, where should you put all the furniture? Like, this is your house. You're supposed to have made me welcomed here, right? And so it goes back to doing that work with folks and saying, listen, do your work first, and then make sure you've done enough work to invite folks into that space, okay? And so I just really want to kind of break that down too. You'll see a little bit more of that in your journals as well.
Can I add something before we keep going?
Oh, go ahead.
So that the discussion of like coded language or like under that iceberg, I saw the word coded language and curriculum or Eurocentric curriculum. That reminded me of a book that I read about anti-racist education specifically, written by Julie Kalin. And in that book, she writes about Madison specifically, and you can see a whole lot of different ways that covert racism still exists, because this was written just like a couple years ago. And the book actually kind of really nicely goes into like ways to actively add back in, what are the words? I mean, it's just to not use Eurocentric like history and that sort of thing, and actually add in history for everybody. But yeah, I just thought that was really, really cool.
Really well with the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. One of the things we talk about, though, is when we see covert racism, one of the ways that it is able to prevail is because I like to call these tools for maintaining oppression, right? So we're moving on in the conversation now. We've already talked about what it means to be an ally in a much more authentic fashion. Now what I want to do is talk more about what are those tools that people are using to maintain that oppression. And you see that book icon, which means you're going to get a chance to go deeper into this. I'm going to actually leave the screen here for you all. And I'm going to ask you if any of these stand out to you. So I'm going to let you all read the screen to yourself. And then what I want to know from you all in about a minute is, after you've got a chance to read through it, is which of these things stand out to you and why? Remember, now we're talking about tools for maintaining oppression. And these particular tools in this toolbox are denial and minimizing, okay? All right, I'm gonna give you all a chance to read through these, and then we'll have a conversation about what stood out to you and why. All right, did any of these stand out to anyone?
I was just gonna say diminishing stood out to me, because we're in a time in society where political views are so high and discussed so much that oftentimes racism gets chalked up to a difference in opinions based on your political views, which I personally don't think is okay. So we have to continue to massage that conversation and break down why that's happening.
Yes, and that brings up why it's so important to not label who is and who isn't a racist, because then you segregate the conversation among certain people. That's good. A few others.
Personalization stood out to me because I think it has the most far-reaching effects out of all the other ones. It has the most impact.
Okay.
Causes division.
Yep, it does.
I said,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one that really stood out to me right away was sidetracking, because I feel like we see that all of the time. Like when one movement comes up, I don't know why people think like, oh, we only have the brain capacity to think about one thing at a time. So like with the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people are saying like, oh, like what about other people, like other groups? And it's like, we have the capacity to think about multiple things at one time and fight like multiple problems. So we don't have to put anything on the back burner or like, sidetrack from the main conversation. We can do a lot of work at the same time.
Thank you. One more person.
Sorry, I was gonna say silencing. It was really fascinating to see how these all interconnect. Like, I feel like you can't have one without the other in some instances. But I was thinking silencing because either remaining silent yourself or silencing voices that need to be heard and that are silencing experiences, and seeing that on like a personal level, just like within your own circles of like not talking about like an instance of racial injustice or violence in your own community, or like silencing from like an institution. Like I just think of like negative experiences like peers of mine have had at school, and like the institution or administration doesn't do anything about it or doesn't say anything, or even like the bare minimum is maybe just a statement. And I feel like that silencing, especially from like the people in power, makes it sometimes become like a norm in personal scenarios not to talk about it, and like belittles the experience and pushes it under the rug again and then sidetracks. And so, yeah, I saw that on personal level, but also from institutions and power.
That's good. I'm going to move on because we have, this toolbox has 4 different segments in it. Now we're going to go to victim blaming. I'm going to do the same thing. Read through, and I want folks who haven't spoken yet to add to the conversation. Which one of these things stand out to you?
For me, I think exploitation jumps out to me right away. You know, kind of turning oppressors like into victims by saying like they're nice, you know, and it's like being nice like is a way to act. It doesn't make you a good or bad person, you know, like just because somebody is polite does not mean that like they are making moral decisions, you know.
I think about trivializing and how a lot of the times when you bring up something when about oppression, they say that, oh, well, you are just like dividing our country. In this moment in time, we need to unify, and what you're doing is divisive, right? And so we shouldn't talk about that. We should focus on like loving each other. We should focus on being one country.
I'm gonna go on top of that with trivializing is like, I don't know, my mom always says like, when we stop talking about racism, like there won't be any, basically. Like she says like the fact that we're talking about it so much is like making it the problem, which obviously is not the case.
All right, I'm going to go to the next toolbox. New folks. Read through. Tell us what stands out to you.
Hi, it's Edith speaking. I was going to say ignorance for me, saying the oppressor didn't know. It's a misunderstanding. I was just reading it right now. It's a misunderstanding, or that they didn't mean it or expecting it. So if it's a misunderstanding, great. But at the same time, is like after that, I feel like they don't put themselves into grasping that, like keeping that in mind, and then not to do it again. Like ignorance, I feel like sometimes is a choice. Obviously, not knowing until you do is inevitable. Like that's normal. But ignorance, most of the time, is a choice. Depends on what you take away from situations is what is important and definitely necessary.
That's good. One more person?
I want to say buffering. I know like not to just like trivialize like one political group, but if I see one more white person post a Candace Owens video anywhere, I'm going to lose my mind.
Okay, so using those relationships with respective folks within the movement to back them up as proof that they cannot be racist and shield them from accountability. Yeah, that is huge in the 21st century. Folks are always trying to, I like to say, exploit relationships so they can make sure that folks don't look at them. And we can see right through it, but more importantly, we got to call that stuff out. All right, here is the last toolbox, new folks, to talk about what stands out to you.
I think the notion of smearing, I've noticed a lot that when somebody does speak out and point out injustice or oppression, the first reaction is to dig into their past and find out reasons why they are not a valid voice of justice because of this tally sheet of injustices they have perpetrated in their past. And I also see that a lot with when victims of violence and police brutality in particular, people immediately go to dig up the past actions of that person who was victimized as or a result of violence, that somehow it invalidates their pain and suffering in the moment.
Perfection. A few others.
I was going to say it's selective. It's not the person's life, the whole life. I picked those specific incidences that make them look like a jerk, that make them look uncivilized, that make them look non-American.
Thank you.
I said gaslighting. I feel like that happens a lot and people are becoming more familiar with the term. So that's why it's being used more. But specifically with this, it allows for at least the oppressor or just people in power to justify their means or their actions, even if it's something that's like, I guess not something that's not normally approved in society. And I think it happens a lot, especially with people of color, because if we would do something, then it can be easily destroyed or I guess you could say uncredible versus if, for example, the entire situation with the Capitol, that was something that was argumentative for some people.
Yep. Thank you. All right. So once again, these toolboxes are in your reflection guide that you'll be getting Monday. And in them, you'll get a chance to talk about and reflect on where you've seen them in your own life, in your community, and on a national scale. Really great exercise for folks who kind of look at the news or social media and they have a very one-sided view or a limited understanding. Them understanding this toolbox of oppression and how they can be used can help you go, wait a minute, I think I've seen that before. And that's critical. As we go throughout this training, I want to really open up our ability, not to just know what an ally is, but to recognize when we are complicit in some of these things that can be really, really covert and not even know it. So there's folks, no matter what race you are, no matter how much money you got or experiences you have, sometimes you fall victim to these types of tools because they're really divisive and they use them very annually all the time. And so it's important for us to recognize what they are, but also be able to point them out and make sure we can move against them. Any questions about those toolboxes before we move on? All right, more of that in your reflection guide. Okay, y'all. So we're gonna play a game. In this particular game, the coin is moving. Which team goes first? Team 1, you're up. Okay, so here's how you play this game. This is called Do Your Work. 6 covert forms of racism performed by well-meaning allies. And although we're talking about race, these things can be performed by folks who maybe want to be allies to different communities outside of race as well. I'm going to put you onto 2 different teams. We're going to have, do you all remember which groups you are in? I want to go group 1 and 2. And then if you have a number 3 and 4 by your name, you're team 2. So team 1 are folks who have a 1 and 2 by their name, and team 2 are folks who have a 3 and a 4 by their name, okay? Team 1, anybody's going to select any one of those terms, and then all you all are doing is deciding which is the real definition of the term. Okay, in your guidebooks, you'll be able to go a little bit deeper into these as well, and unpacking them and even doing some challenges within yourself. But for now, let's play the game. All right, team 1, you all are folks who have a 1 or a 2 by your name. I'd like to know which one do you all want to go with first?
Apathy.
Apathy, okay. Which is the correct definition of white apathy? Having a lack of feeling or emotions, interest or concern for the ideas, needs, demands, and realities of people of color, or having a lack of feeling or emotions of interest or concerns for ideas. Oh, I'm sorry, they're the same, okay? So I'm gonna actually give you all that one. Oh, no, they're not.
No, they weren't the same. They changed at the end. I mean, I was gonna say the red one anyway, but.
The red one? Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody know why it is the red one and why it's not the green one? Y'all good with that? So white apathy is not having empathy for folks of different races. A lot of times people contextualize it by saying, well, I need to have apathy toward my own race. And that's not necessarily what we're talking about here, okay? So team 1, you all got that one right. I'm gonna take it out of the game and give you all 100 points. Team 2, which one do you all wanna go to next? Any?
How about white centering?
White centering? Let's go for it and see what happens. All right, which of them is the correct definition? I'll read it all the way through this time. Centering white stories, values, norms, feelings, and perspectives over the needs, interests, and realities of communities of color, or is it meditating and reflecting on the role whiteness has played in your life, aligning the mind with the body to explore all the many ways whiteness shows up? Which one of these is white centering? 3 or 4 next to your name.
The first one.
The red one.
Red.
Does anyone say the green one? Okay. That red one is correct. All right. Both teams, you all are tied so far. So we got white centering, team 2. Team 1 is back on you.
Tone policing.
Tone policing. Let's make it there. Is it either people with power and privilege silencing people of color and ignoring their demands because they don't like the person of color's tone of voice? Or is it the tone of voice people of color use while speaking to white people that have power over them, such as police officers and professionals? Which one is the correct definition of tone policing?
Red one.
Red one.
Red one. Red one.
Red.
Perfection. All right, I'm going to give team 1 300 points. And team 2, you're up.
Optical allyship.
Optical allyship. Let's see where we're going. Which is the correct definition? The best allyship for the moment. This allyship shows up in just the right way to applaud white efforts. Or is optical allyship when allies engage in surface level support of marginalized groups without commitment to unlearning their prejudice or contributing to tangible change?
Red.
Red. Anybody else? Red and red?
Yeah.
Perfection. All right, I'm gonna go right back to it. Team 2, you all got 300 points. All right, team 1, either white silence or moral licensing.
Moral licensing.
Moral licensing. Let's see what happens. All right, is it either minimizing harm you've caused toward people of color because you've performed acts of allyship and solidarity in the past, or is it persuading people of color to adopt morally sound resistance tactics to achieve racial justice demands?
Green.
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 Green? Wrong. Moral licensing, minimizing harm you've caused toward people of color because you've performed active allyship and solidarity in the past. Moral licensing is the idea, I'd like to say, it's like cashing in on coins you've collected. Okay, you know, maybe in the past I walked with LGBTQ folks, or I've walked with young people and I've shared a few statuses, right? And I'm like, yeah. And then maybe one day I call someone a derogatory term. And I go, now y'all know, wait a minute now, don't come at me like that because I've already been sharing statuses. I've already been marching, okay? So I'm good, don't come at me reckless, right? That is moral licensing, giving yourself permission to do something incorrectly or wrong or oppressive because you've already done something that was positive or that was in solidarity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, which team was that, team 2?
Team 1, it was team 1.
Okay, team 1, you all did not get that extra point, okay? But team 2, I'm gonna go to white silence. If you all get this one, you can win the game with 600 points. Let's see what happens. Which is the correct definition? When white people know they're talking too much during conversations about race and self-correct with silence, or when white people choose not to speak up, hold other white people accountable, or contribute to conversations about race. Which one is white silence?
Red.
Red. Y'all like, I know that one. Yes. White people choose not to speak up, hold other white people accountable, or contribute to conversations about race. That is good, y'all. Each one of these particular definitions and some more context are in your guidebooks. You're going to get a chance to talk about, as an ally to a marginalized community, even no matter what race you are, which one of these you have used and why, right? And how did it impact folks as well? Okay, thank you all for playing that game. That is our quick and dirty rendition of each of these definitions. Does anyone have a question about any of these definitions or want to go a little bit deeper about any of them?
I do, Jeremy.
Please.
And first of all, I want to say thank you. You are so good at maintaining understanding and civility and a positive atmosphere in a very charged subject. So I wanted to say thanks for putting this on and putting it together and being so entertaining. You're welcome. I want to break white silence right now. So listen, you know, for me to come on here and to be the white woman what I feel like is, so the minorities have found an oppressor and they've targeted the oppressor, and now we're going to go after the white people, right? This is how it feels for me. So let's get cringy for a minute, okay? Because I'm going to speak my piece, okay? But you should, how about let's go, because I grew up in Washington D.C. Like after 10 p.m. you never go in Southeast, because those are the ghetto. That's the ghetto. You let them figure it out, right? Like, and then and my heritage is I'm a pioneer stock, and we have been persecuted and religiously persecuted like for hundreds of years, and gone through horrible things. And here's another thing. How about you try being a white woman over 30 in a Botox nation? I mean, that is a horrible place to be. I mean, if you're not size 0, if you have wrinkles, these are all things that, and I know I'm trivializing the racial situation, but what I'm trying to explain to you is this is how I feel coming into this subject. So what do I do with it? How do I take what I have, what feels like almost like angst to me, and metabolize it into something that's productive? Because here is my position and my perspective, because I'm not a minority. And I live here in Wisconsin. We live right next to a lot of the tribal organizations, and they have so many opportunities in so many ways that I didn't have as a kid, and yet they end up in alcoholism or something, and so there are responsibilities on both sides of the fence. And also a big problem that happens is you've got taking individual responsibility versus the responsibility of an organization, or and this is the gray area, is that the responsibility falls between an individual versus a massive institution that pre-existed even before we were ever born here.
Yeah.
So there's all my frustrations. Tell me what I can do with it.
Okay. Are you a white lady?
You think? I'm a white lady over 30.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually ask for other white folks to chime in and answer that question.
Me, I'm a white person. I'm 24, and someone has actually told this to me. I think, like as far as like thinking of grief, like as concentric circles, like at the center is like the problem, and like how like most, like if you are affected by it, like you might not have the same feelings like as somebody in like a different like or outer concentric circle. So I think like talking to your concentric circle of other white ladies is very valuable, because those feelings are going to be like those feelings can be shared while you're not trying to minimize like other people's grief. And because like those frustrations are very real, like you don't want to invalidate like somebody's feelings just because it might not be at like the level of like oppression like that racism is, like it might not be as material or considered like as hard, but I think those feelings are still valid. So talking to people who might share those similar problems could help get that angst out, I think, because you're not burdening those people.
And I'll give space for this for one more comment, and then we'll move on.
I have a comment. I'd like to just bring in the idea of the sociological imagination, in that oppression has, it overlaps in very different ways in different communities. And I think that it's important to recognize, to the comment about, Botox Nation and this, this goal we have, this construction of, wanting to be size 0. That's something that a lot of people feel regardless of race or where they live. And so I think that trying to recognize how this angst is materializing in terms of how it overlaps with other communities, I think is important. So sociology is a great way to explain that. There's many sociological theories that help break down who's oppressed and why and how those interact.
That's good. Thank you, Haley. I think the only thing I'll say about that particular comment is I've been in training for 10 years, and there is always a contingent or tension when it comes to race-based trainings, because as human beings, I know white folks, you all got problems too. right? And I completely understand that, right? Like if we're talking about living life, we're all doing that, right? And so conversations about race that center around other folks who are not white isn't about silencing white people or minimizing white folks. That exercise is helping white folks recognize that for this 2 hours, you finally get to be in a space where you aren't the neutral point in the conversation. I'll give you an example. I grew up my entire life talking about white people, like the whole life. I went to a predominantly African-American led elementary school and we talked about white people all the time until it became February. All the time. It's not I remember growing up thinking that's for white folks. Like, and it was always like money, Roth IRAs. It was always reading books to your kids. It was stuff that was for anybody. But in my mind, I only saw white people doing it. So I decided, you know what, if that's for them and I never see nobody like me, it must not be for me. And the point I'm making here is that when you're in these trainings and you feel like your voice and your reality is being snuffed out, in part, it is intentional. So you can exercise what it means not to be the common denominator in a conversation or the neutral perspective in a dialogue. I'm 30 and I've been talking more about white people, including right now, than white folks have ever had to talk about what it means to be white at the expense of Black people, right? And so I want you to sit with the idea that although you may be anxious and you may be frustrated at times because maybe your lived reality isn't necessarily highlighted, I want you to understand that this is one of those few moments in your life where that can be true. And you have to really recognize, so someone told me this the other day about the folks who had stormed the Capitol. And they were like, sometimes white people think that when, and I'm not saying this is what you think, I'm saying in general, the idea can be that if they're not being centered, then they must be left out. And it's not true. Equity and equality means we don't center one group, we center multiple groups. Now, the reason why we're centering people of color today is because we have been left out. And so the idea here is until everybody has an equal stake in the conversation and lives reality and in this country, we will begin to focus on folks who don't, so that we can move that needle. And so I just want to encourage you to let that feeling of maybe being misunderstood or whatever it is, let that sit there and recognize that that is a lifestyle for some people, not just a moment. Okay? So that's how much time we're going to give to that. You all can actually go into your guidebooks on Monday, you'll receive them, and you'll actually have a whole list of reasons why white folks don't like to have conversations like these. And one of them is that they feel like they may be misunderstood. Okay, you can unpack that at that time as well. But I thank you a lot for bringing that up. That's a powerful conversation. Okay, let's keep on moving. Let's go into a group here. Let's go into a group. I want to group you all now to unpack this particular excerpt from MLK. It's the yellow one. What modern day events have exposed the nation to its racial tensions? That goes right with the conversation we were just having. I want to put you all in the groups right now. 7 minutes to answer those questions, and then be prepared to share out that particular answer around racial tension in America. All right, you all can do that at this time.
So as we go into groups now, we'll be back around 10:51.
Yep. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you all for going into groups. Hopefully you all find this conversation, an excerpt from MLK's letter, to be fruitful as well. What I want to do is get to those 4 folks. It's 10:52. We got a little bit more to go. So I'd like for you all to line yourselves up and let's make it happen. Can someone talk to us about what modern day events have exposed the nation to its racial tensions? One example.
I'm from group 2, Kendra, the white people, and we talked about we talked about something that's like long lasting, like as the Black Lives Matter movement, and something that happened last week at the Capitol. You know, like commentary on if the people who stormed the Capitol were a different race, like would that have been handled differently? You know, like would all these people still be alive?
Yeah, thank you. Someone else, different group.
Charlottesville.
Is there a different group that wants to speak?
Well, my group talked about how it was interesting how timeless this quote is, and we talked about how everyone is just kind of like 2020, like all this horrible stuff happened, like everyone hates each other now, but in reality, it really was just bringing injustice and tension that already existed to the surface.
Thank you.
So it was just cool seeing how MLK could articulate what's happening today as well.
Yeah. All right, 2 other groups.
The police shootings and how the victims who are unrelated to some of the arrests were killed, and then we find out there will be no charges.
Yep. And then last group, please.
Not so much about the modern day, but just about the quote in general. We talked about how everything he says in this quote is just really powerful, and everything he says is correctly stated of the fact that in order for something to be fixed, it has to be brought out into the open. And there are just some people that are more willing to like bring it out into the open, and then that needs to change for a lot of other people too, to just be able to talk about it and to deal with it in that way.
Perfection. Thank you, Grace. I love that quote. It actually moves us right into our next piece. In order for it to be fixed, somebody got to be willing to bring it out into the open. One of the things we talk about, there's a book called Two-Faced Racism. Not sure if you ever read it before, but they create this scenario and they call it the front stage and backstage. And the idea here is that folks are performing sometimes when it comes to racism. And in that performance, when we're in front of other folks who are diverse audiences, we may find ourselves being one of these actors, right? And so the question that you all will consider in your guidebook is, which one of these actors do you want to be when there are moments of racism happening? And we can talk about this from a personal level, a communal level, a local level, and a national level. So the first one is that instigator, that person who does the thing that is considered racist or anti-Black or anti-Asian, whatever it is. And then they have an instigator, the person justifying the offender or the institution putting out a letter justifying it or whatever. And so these two people or these two roles exist, and some of us have filled them before. Okay, whether we're talking about being an ally to a different community or a different identity, or we're talking about race, maybe we've been in the hot seat. We instigated something that shouldn't have been, never happened, and or we've been that person who initiated something that should have never happened. The idea here, and you can look more into your guidebooks on Monday, is that you really want to unpack, wow, why did I do that? Did I think it was appropriate? How did folks respond to me? It's going to provide you with a really good, clear-cut example of which role you can take every time something happens. And you can always, we always take on a role. That's kind of the point here. The last two is the bystander and the interventionist. That bystander who is usually silent, choose not to say anything. You know, maybe that's the person who doesn't call their mom out. Maybe that's the person who just kind of act like they didn't see it or don't understand it, right? Question becomes why? Why did you decide not to speak up? Why did you decide not to act? And the truth of the matter is, speaking up and acting, that interventionist status, that can be dangerous. Let's be clear. I recognize that I'm not bringing up something here that is comfortable, but what we have to understand is folks end up dead when nobody intervenes, right? And so we recognize that the status quo is also dangerous. The question is, which of those dangers leads us to equity? And so I'm encouraging us to not only in your guidebooks reflect on which one of these things you've done and which identity groups you've done them to, but also think about how you can begin to intervene more often. Okay, the last few things I want to mention is that sometimes you got to straight out apologize, and you don't have a lot of time at times, right? And so maybe these are a few things you could tell folks, listen, I hear you. or I'll reflect on that, or I appreciate your feedback. I'm thankful for the information, or I may have caused harm, and just acknowledging it. When we talk about what it means for that racial tension to come up, in the midst of it all, sometimes we have to recognize that our apology, sometimes we ain't got all day to do it, but it can be quick. And for people who want to be allies, these are some quotes or some sayings you can adopt when you recognize, like, oh, I think I'm being held accountable here, right? Instead of justifying and rationalizing, lean in this way. It helps folks recognize that you are hearing what they're saying. And the last thing I want to introduce you all to is a 6-part structured apology. Okay, and this particular one, organizations can use them in their organizations, or you can even use it to a friend or family member who you may have harmed, right? What was harmful? What was my role? How do I feel? Here's what I won't be doing. Here's what I will do. And if this happens again, ... So in your guidebooks, you'll see this particular framework as well. And you can begin to play around with how you can use it. My point here is that sometimes you got to address things quickly, but a lot of times you have to go in and do a more formal apology. And you can use this framework at an organizational level or an individual level as you work on being an ally to communities. Okay? All right. So that is where we'll end it. And I'd like to put a few quotes here up on the screen for you that reminds you of what this work is really all about. I want to thank you all for your time today. Thank you all for this work that you've been helping us do. And remember that being a part of trainings like these is not in and of itself racial justice, but it is a doorway into doing racial justice work. All right, that's all I have for you. On Monday, you can expect your application video and your reflection guide. Please take a moment and do the fillable or digital feedback forms. If it doesn't work one way, try the other one. It should work for you. And those should be in the chat box at this time.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. That was awesome
you.
today.
Yes, it was. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending.